Irina Zuckerman is a West Asia analyst. She's now joining us live from Washington, D.C. Irina, good to see you and welcome to the program. The UK has not mentioned any stopping of arms sales to Israel. Britain's Foreign Secretary David Cameron says Israel cannot take British aid for granted. The US has already threatened to shift its foreign policy towards Israel. What do you read from these two statements from the US and the UK, and what impact do you think this will have on Israel going forward?
Good evening. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Well, first of all, let's start with the fact that the language of the British statement essentially is a much milder statement. It is basically a signal to everyone involved, but I don't think anyone truly believes that Israel is taking British aid for granted, and nor do I believe Prime Minister Sunak believes that Israel deliberately targeted aid workers as aid workers. As we already know from Israel's statements and from its actions, it's misidentified the people inside the vehicle, believing that a Hamas member was present who was not. Action was quickly taken to hold those responsible accountable, and people were fired. And I think that's as good as you can do given the tragic circumstances of warfare. The U.S. statement is a little different. I think the reason there's a threat of a shift is not specifically due to this one incident. After all, the United States has also misidentified and tragically killed civilians in various military operations in the past, and hardly anyone expects any country to be perfect at the time of warfare. What they expect them to be is to be responsible, accountable, and to change their procedures in response to mistakes which Israel has done. And Hamas, by the way, has never taken a responsibility or accountability for civilian deaths. I think the U.S. statement is actually more of a sense of general frustration and weakness in response to a foreign policy that is flailing in the Middle East. I think the administration expected the war to be over much sooner than it now is, and I think it is frustrated not only with the domestic political situation, but in general, the general international context, which views U.S. foreign policy as ineffective. And I don't think they have a handle on how to deal with that other than pressuring Israel, which is a democratic country, which is heavily dependent on U.S. assistance, and is the only country that is able to respond to pressure. Iran, which is responsible for this conflict, terrorist organizations are not. They're not responding to U.S. pressure at all.
Irina, support from the West towards Israel started waning weeks ago, and now there is the recent deaths of World Central Kitchen aid workers in Gaza. What do you think this latest grave mistake by Israel will do to their already deteriorating relations with these countries, especially the U.S., which is going to the polls soon?
Well, actually, in terms of policy, we don't see U.S. announcing any stop to any weapons, but I do believe there is a lot of frustration, and Washington is looking for a scapegoat. And I think this incident is a pretext for that. I don't think it's actually the reason for anything. And I think everyone who's ever been involved in military operations understands that humanitarian aid workers put themselves at grave risk, even of friendly fire in very high stress situations. And again, Israel took responsibility immediately, and its investigation was very swift and very transparent, and people were fired and procedures were changed. I do think that U.S. wants to be seen as doing something, and I think the pressure it's facing is not so much from domestic audiences, which actually are negligible, and foreign policy is not a big factor in these U.S. elections, but from other countries. And I think U.S. is struggling to define its policy in the Middle East. I think there is a lot of pressure coming from countries like Qatar, which have become politically important to Washington. Qatar has been designated as a major non-NATO U.S. ally. It has pledged a lot of financial contributions to various projects in the U.S., and it's been one of the top buyers of U.S. weapons. U.S. understands that if it stops aid to Israel, two things may happen. First, actually, Israel will suffer from a lack of precision weapons, and that actually could lead to more mistakes rather than fewer. So denying weapons in response to mistakes actually is likely to make the situation worse. The other issue is Israel is already shifting towards defense independence through various means, and a position that could hurt U.S. interests. And I think there is a general frustration about how to manage different political and economic aims resulting from different points of pressure. And that's why I think the administration is making these statements to appease certain countries and certain donors and certain investors, but at the same time is actually reluctant to put an end to this aid for these practical reasons.
All right, I've been talking to West Asia analyst Irina Suckerman. Irina, as always, thank you very much for talking to us today. For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.